Dark is easily one of the greatest pieces of fictional art form that we have had the privilege of watching in recent times. And I could easily go on about how good the story is written. The narratives, the philosophies, the plot, the acting, the whole series is just a celebration of good storytelling. But I feel like people have covered these topics slowly but surely over the years. So I want to approach the storytelling from a different perspective, the visuals. And for me, the thing that makes Dark the closest thing to absolute perfection. I think it goes without saying that the best forms of visual storytelling are the ones that have narrative harmony. You take a look at some of the best movies and TV shows ever made, you'd see that the visuals complement the storytelling. Think of the inescapable green tint of The Matrix, or the vertical architecture in Parasite. These are visual motifs that were deliberately chosen to support the story's narrative, and without them, these stories don't have the same kind of impact. And that is exactly how Dark delivers its message, starting off with probably the most important facet of Dark's aesthetic, framing and composition. In visual storytelling, framing and composition combines to guide the audience's eyes through a particular shot. In a frame such as this, the wide-angle framing defines a character in relation to their environment, and the centered composition with a foggy background suggests the character facing a sort of inevitable choice. Now, this is how you create visual meaning within a shot. These elements complement the storytelling. And I do believe that most visual stories have an overarching word that could be used to define the framing and composition within it. In Blade Runner, the philosophy is existentialism, and therefore the visual expression portrays these vast compositions and empty environments to fulfill this meaning. In Parasite, the visual architecture implies class divisions within society. And similarly, the visual expression of Dark is entrapment, or as I like to call it, the illusion of free will. You see, the framing and composition of Dark has this tendency to enclose its characters within spaces, almost like they're trapped within something. Take a look at this shot from season 1. You have a centered composition, and the character is enclosed within a passage. Now you're gonna film this shot from the other side, but the sense of entering into the unknown is much more impactful if you do it this way. The character is being observed from the perspective of the cave, not the other way around. It subconsciously implies that this person is not in control of the situation, as if the cave has more power in this scenario. But this is not just a fancy shot that just so happens the way it does. It repeats, as often it needs to, and it carries the same meaning throughout the story. The character is trapped within time. And the more you observe these frames, you start realizing that the visuals have a sense of purpose. Fate is geometry here. When another show might explain to you how the characters are trapped within a story, Dark displays this determinism in its visuals. You would know that symmetry is another ubiquitous visual motif of Dark. It's pretty much everywhere, but what is often characterized as order and balance takes a very different meaning here. Symmetry within an image carries different meaning based on the context. Depending on how you use it in a story, it could go from aesthetically pleasing to extensively disturbing. While the Grand Budapest Hotel uses symmetrical framing for order and an aesthetic elegance, the same kind of structural designs in The Shining goes from discipline to unsettling pretty quickly. And in Dark, the same symmetry is the inescapable structure of the storyline. It makes the world feel predetermined. Take a look at this frame. Jonas is on his bike in the middle of the road, which cuts the frame in half. You have equal weight on either side. And although this frame is meant to be a natural one, maybe a glimpse of reality in a German village, if you will, there is something unusually mechanical about it. It's not something that strikes you at the very moment, but in retrospect, as the story moves along, I promise you, you will feel a sense of uneasiness knowing what you now know. The symmetry suggests an overarching design, and this symmetry emphasizes the mechanical nature of the world even more. Jonas is shot and killed, and Marta is devastated at the very sight of this, but notice how symmetrical the frame is. Normally, you wouldn't put that much emphasis on the environment in a scene such as this. This is supposed to be an emotional scene that would encompass close-ups of the characters' faces to portray that visceral emotion of loss and grief. But not here. The camera slowly pans out, and all of a sudden, the environment slowly gathers prominence. It is kinda unusual for the emotions of a scene such as this to be taken away like that. But in the bigger picture, this shot is the most important one. Not this or this, but Jonas and Martha at the center of this symmetry, suggesting, even before it's revealed later on, that they are the source, the origin of this predetermined system. But if symmetry becomes uneasy, the wide-angled framing creates a sense of insignificance. Think of the movies like Blade Runner 2049 or Lawrence of Arabia, where the scale of the world itself turns into an inescapable character. And often, this type of framing is utilized by the filmmakers to create a sense of isolation or loneliness, where the characters are placed in huge environments and where the negative space speaks through their loneliness. When done correctly, it is incredibly powerful, something that conveys so much emotion without actually saying too much. But I think in Dark, they go the extra mile. Instead of just isolating these characters to portray loneliness, the negative space often conveys something far deeper. They're not just alone from the characters within the story, but they are alone against things like time and fate, uncontrollable variables that they can neither control nor comprehend. Something that changes the visual narrative from isolation to existential isolation. And that's where the camera perspective comes in as well. Do you remember when I talked about the first few seasons of Stranger Things and how it was the camera angle that made the story feel like a documentary? I called it observational filmmaking, as if the camera is observing the characters from a distance rather than the characters knowing exactly where the cameras are. Now this creates a very realistic feeling within the frame. A lot of drama is filmed this way to unfold life naturally. But then I realized that even Dark also uses observational filmmaking, but not quite in the way you see here. At first I thought it was just random, but then quickly realized that it was a very specific style of observational filmmaking that they were using. Instead of this natural hidden camera angle, it was almost like the camera was watching over these characters. Case in point being this shot. You might think it's just a simple drone shot. What's so special about it? Well, it only becomes a pattern once you notice the perspective. Again, and again, and again. Almost like the camera is omniscient. Almost like the one watching over them is time. And God is time.
Gott ist Zeit.
In a shot such as this, the negative space creates that isolation, something which you're bound to see in a dramatic visual story. But the overseeing camera perspective, well, that is what pushes that isolation into something more existential. It's like no matter what they do, the environment, the world, and eventually time will always catch up to them. And that's basically all show don't tell. There is no amount of exposition that explains this visual harmony at work. But the people behind the scenes put effort into intentionally creating shots and scenes that make sense from the story's perspective. You don't always have to tell exactly what's happening when the visuals can do the explaining for you. And then there is the lighting, and throw in a bit of colors in there as well. Colors and lighting convey meaning in visual storytelling. When the visuals have a lot of brightness and saturation, the more exciting and alive a scene becomes. And such motifs are used on the regular in cinematography to create a support structure for the story. The basic rule is that colors and lighting works best when it reinforces the themes and emotions within a story. And that's what they do in Dark as well. Dark, by definition, is a show that is devoid of colors. The philosophy of the show doesn't allow a bright color palette. However, when a splash of brightness is allowed in the storyline, it serves a color motif, something which stands out against the desaturation. The predominance of muted colors is symbolic of the world and the characters in it. This is not an optimistic show, rather a murky and melancholic one, where the environment encodes the philosophies of the narrative within the visuals. Colors like green and brown are some of the dominant colors in the show. but you'd hardly find a saturated shade amongst them, making these environments feel old and archaic, not one that is lush and inviting. There is a sense of decay that's associated with the world, and so the colors naturally follow this pattern. But when you mute the colors of the environment, a few colors will eventually stick out from the background. And one of the most obvious colors that does this is yellow, the raincoat specifically. Although the backstory of the yellow raincoat is quite amusing,
I had an intern who was helping me. We went outside, went to this little foresty behind Ari. And because it was an overcast and slightly raining day, he had a yellow raincoat. Later on, when I showed Bo the test, he also saw him in this yellow coat. And then was the decision made that Jonas should have had a yellow raincoat when he's walking into the forest.
Much like most of the brighter colors in the show, it serves as the visual guide within the story. In the first season, it is almost exclusively worn by Jonas, the central character of the show. And against the dark and moody world of the story, the yellow raincoat acts like the antithesis to it. It represents the hope Jonas carries. But the further he toils with time, his clothes start getting darker and darker, almost like time had consumed the color of hope from this character. And then, as the narrative shifts into Ava's world, the raincoat is almost exclusively worn by Marta, who also happens to be the visual counterpart of Jonas by this time. But even with Marta, the raincoat represents the hope that she carries. But the older Marta is also kind of jaded, just like Jonas, and she stops wearing the brighter hopeful color as she turns into Ava. And these kinds of symbolic color motifs are carefully crafted within the storyline. Be it the red thread of Ariadne, the glowing blue of time travel, the warm orange of comfort, and even the black shades of acceptance. These are not just random decisions, but some smart symbolism from people who knew exactly what they were doing. And this is why, even when it comes to lighting, there is that careful craftsmanship which allows a seamless immersion within the world building. The show hardly uses any stylized lighting that takes you out of the immersion of the storyline. To keep the world consistent, it uses a blend of naturalistic and motivated lighting. In this frame, you can tell how the lighting is diegetic. There are no unexplainable light sources here, and not to mention the separation between the light and dark areas. Nothing here suggests that this is movie lighting. It feels like a moment in real life. And also, the light only seems to illuminate parts of the image. There is no flat lighting that lets you see everything on the screen, which adds to the realism here. Even when you switch to daytime lighting, there is a great deal of importance given to naturalism. A lot of these scenes are shot in realistic environments while keeping the stylization in check. But there's also symbolism within the lighting as well. You can separate the warm lights and the cool ones and connect it to the nature of the scene. For instance, whenever characters are under the presence of warm lights, tungsten lamps, and candle lights, there is a sense of comfort and nostalgia, and even intimacy to the story. But in contrast, the cool tones are much more uncontrollable. It is mysterious when it shows up, and by extension, it becomes the lighting of the bigger picture. Time travel is often represented under this blue light, and so are the caves, things that are often beyond the control of these characters. And I feel like the subtlety of the lighting in these situations enhances the connected emotions that one feels because of it. When I see warm lighting, I kinda know that it is safe and comforting, while when the blue lighting shows up, we are at the precipice of a mystery or an impending revelation of sorts. And this creates that visual harmony that I've been talking about. A story that has accompanying colors and lighting enables the audience to feel the immersion of the world. And last but not the least, I want to talk about the pacing. And even though it doesn't come under cinematography, there is something here with the editing style that I appreciate so much, which we have lost in modern day spectacles, and that is holding the camera. You see, Dark is a story that unfolds in a methodical fashion. But a lot of this deliberate revelation is carried out visually, which means the camera and the editing is doing some heavy lifting here. Pacing is sort of an umbrella term when people use it. A movie that has a fast pacing might be referring to the narrative pacing, or emotional pacing, or pacing of the editing. which means you can have a fast-paced story that might have a slow style editing, even though it does sound counterintuitive. But that's kind of the beauty of Dark's editing. In this story, the narrative pacing is actually pretty fast. There's a lot of new information that you're getting in every scene. A typical episode here may contain information about multiple decades, multiple characters, and even have several clues and revelations that affects the storyline quite consistently. And from a storyline perspective, there's a lot happening here. But that's where the visual pacing comes in. Even when the story is advancing at a fast pace, the visuals linger, meaning the images move at a slower pace. And this is why the shot length becomes important here. Although this is a mystery thriller where information has the highest priority, it has a tendency of playing the shot into completion. And what I mean by that is the contemplative part of a shot. You frame a character within the shot, then you press record, but the camera stays there for a while. Even when you get ready for the next shot, there is a moment of slowing things down, lingering on a frame, which kinda changes the way the visuals explain things. If a mystery show plans to surprise the audience, a show like Dark plans for them to absorb it. Instead of overwhelming you with fast cuts and information dumping, it gives you breathing space between the scenes to process the information. In other words, it tells a fast-moving story in a slow-moving way. And this visual pacing is what breathes life into the environment. In a shot such as this, you could cut somewhere around here, but letting it play for a few extra seconds or so lets the forest become a character. You give the audience time to think, they will wholeheartedly take that opportunity. And that's how you create immersion.
Ich glaube, ich finde Jonas einen schönen Namen.
So there it is. You don't normally come across a lot of shows that have the perfect narrative harmony. You might get a great story with good visuals, or good visuals with an average story. But rarely do you get a great story with the perfect visuals to back that greatness. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.